just won't have a cool name.
That's cool. All right, we are live. This is Hangops for February 13th, 2015. And pretty interesting topic today. We're going to talk about packaging and package hosting and some of the challenges around that, and pretty cool work that our guests today, Joe and Julio, are some stuff that they're up to. So we'll start with a couple just some introductions. Start with you, Joe, kind of like who you are and what's going on.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Joe. I just been, I'm sort of like by background like a systems programmer. I do like a lot of, like C stuff. I built a service called packagecloud, and I actually started it with my friend James Golick, who some of you may have heard about. He was a big programmer in like the web app and like Ruby community and stuff, and sort of like he and I, we're talking for a while about trying to build a company together. We wanted to build something that we thought would be cool, so we ended up deciding that package hosting as a service would be like a really cool thing to build, because it's something that I had needed at previous jobs I was at, and something that James had run into with some like DevOps stuff that he had done at previous companies he was at as well. Actually, I don't know. Maybe now would be a good time for me just to quickly mention that I don't know. I'm sure most of you have heard that my friend James had passed away a few weeks ago at the end of December, and his family set up a grant in his name. It's called the James Golick Grant for Women in Computology. I can tweet out a link or send you a link or something like that, and maybe you can drop it in the IRC channel or something. But the grant basically just exists to try to help sort of push, try to get more women involved in computers and technology and stuff. It's something that James is really passionate about. And so, anybody who's out there who's watching, who can, donate like $5 or $6 or something like that, any amount is definitely really appreciated by, me personally, because he was my friend, and also, by his family as well.
Yeah, definitely. James, he was an amazing guy. I never got the chance to meet him directly, but interacted with him a lot on IRC, and just, in the wake of his passing, seeing the amount of people and the number of tech communities that he had touched was really cool. And so this is definitely a cool thing to, just as part of his legacy. So I'll put the IRC channel, we'll tweet that out, and it's a great thing if anyone.
Definitely a good cause.
Yes, definitely. So I definitely wanted to mention that. So leading with that is great. So it kind of brings us to now, right? You guys got packagecloud going, and that's been a thing for a little bit. And Julio, you recently joined up, and you're working on that as well, right?
Yeah, I joined as of 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah, I was just I've been at Twitter for 3 years before that, just kind of doing web development, back-end engineering, infrastructure stuff, and I felt that was a good run. I wanted to work somewhere smaller, build something more impactful, so I decided to join up with Joe and do this packaging thing.
So maybe we could start with kind of the challenge. Like, what's the premise of, like, obviously you guys saw a need, and felt that you could provide a better solution to some of the stuff that's going on in this in packaging. So kind of maybe let's start with, like, what's the challenge there, and
Sure. Yeah. So I think there's like a couple different challenges there. Like, it's like a multifaceted thing, right? So I think it's pretty common now that people will use some configuration management thing like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, SaltStack. I don't know, like, just like people will use like some system for managing the configurations on their servers, and a lot of times people will try to install software, and when they do so, it's actually sort of, I wouldn't say it's really common, but I've seen a lot of Chef recipes or Puppet manifests or whatever, where people will actually go and just compile software just directly, like they'll run like /configure make install like directly in like a chef recipe or something. And I don't know, like there's a lot of problems with that approach. I don't want to be too critical of it, but it's actually like a pretty bad approach. And I thought that like some of the problems around that are A, that just like packaging in general is hard, and B, like once you've generated a package, like finding a place to put it and host it is also a pain, because none of the tools that exist for hosting or creating like Yum repositories or app repositories, like those tools give you the illusion that they work, but they don't actually work. And so when James and I were talking about this problem initially, we thought that like the best place to start would be to start by just building a place where people could host package repositories where they could upload private packages for things like their internal infrastructure, or they could upload packages for things like software they're distributing and selling to customers. And so like packagecloud sort of takes care of everything around that. So you can store as many versions as you want, which is not possible with the the Debian apps tool system. Like that system only supports like the most recent version of a package that gets uploaded. We also take care of everything from GPG keys to SSL signature verification, SSLs verification. We set up, so when you install a repository on your machine, we set up like all the necessary packages that you need to have installed locally to actually securely access the package repository.
Which is that's not a default thing, right?
Right. So like a lot of times like people will try to build a package repository, for like say a bunch of Yum packages, and they'll tell people, okay, like we have this Yum repository, there's like GPG signatures, there's like SSL, like you should use this, right? But a thing that a lot of people don't know is that like on a lot of versions of CentOS, GPG signature verification just doesn't actually work unless you have a bunch of packages, like supplementary packages installed that don't have a dependency on Yum, right? So like you could add a supposedly secure Yum repository to your machine and try to use it, but your machine won't actually be verifying GPG signatures, or won't actually be doing SSL certificate verification or anything like that, just because none of those options are configured properly by default on a lot of systems. And so like part of like what we built with packagecloud is just like the solution to like all that. Like not only can you upload packages to us and like not worry about how many versions you upload, but you can also ensure that when you install the repository on your machine, that GPG will actually be set up properly, that SSL signature verification will be enabled, and sort of like all the stuff around that's already taken care of for you. Because a lot, like the open source tools, like they serve a purpose, but like in general, like the documentation for them is really, really hard to understand. It's hard to read. It's missing. A lot of it's incorrect. And so like I've seen other companies that they sell software. They have their packages hosted somewhere, and I go and I read their instructions, and like I can tell from looking at a repository that like they're just not doing it right. Like they're not using GPG properly, or they have a misunderstanding of how GPG actually works with packages and package repositories. And there's just like a lot of like really, really sort of like hairy yaks that need to get shaved when you go into hosting package repositories. Like it's a thing that people think is like really, really easy. It's like, oh, like I can just run this program like on my computer and it's done. But it turns out that like it's actually much more difficult than that. There's like really, really, really complicated sort of implications security-wise that need to be considered that are often not considered or not documented or not well understood. So that's sort of like the general problem that we're trying to solve. We're just trying to make that whole process like easier and more approachable, and not let people have to sort of like let people spend their brain power thinking about what they're building, as opposed to like how do I securely set this up and manage it. So
yeah, that's also why I think a lot of people just go with the configure, make, install, because I mean it just works, and you can get it done for just getting it done, and then you can move on to building what you're actually building. So if we can hosting packages as easy as running, make, install in your cookbooks, but with all the benefits of actually having repeatable builds and like packages hosted and versions and whatnot. It's a win-win.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so like anyone out there who's tuning in who is currently running like make, install, whatever in their chef recipes or puppet manifests or whatever, even if you don't end up using packagecloud or anything like that, you should certainly reconsider building software in your chef recipes. The main reason why is, well, there's a few reasons actually, right? So one reason is like if you ever need to uninstall something for some reason, like a lot of open source like programs like don't actually have like an uninstall make target. So like I've done make install on a VM when I'm playing around with like someone's source tree, and I get a bunch of source that just gets a bunch of objects that get written to my file system, and then like I can't remove them because there's no uninstall target, and I have no idea like where everything got written. But also like things like it makes things like upgrades like really really difficult. You can never ensure that artifacts from previous installations are actually removed. So I don't know, like the configure, make install thing like has a purpose. Like I think that purpose is like probably for like development and like testing, but like in general, right? If you're running like a production system, you definitely want to actually build packages for the software that you're installing on your systems, because you need to know that when you upgrade those things that like the previous version will be completely uninstalled, or that you'll be able to repeatedly install the same Ruby binary or MySQL binary or whatever on every machine that you're deploying it out to, right? So it's really important. Not enough people take it seriously, but it's like actually like a pretty important sort of like fundamental thing in my opinion when it comes to like DevOps and stuff. So
It also just makes your chef converges take forever.
oh, you mean doing make install?
Right.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like I don't know. It's all around bad, right? Like it makes it more difficult to test. Like if you're using like Kitchen CI or something, and you're just like writing a bunch of files out to the file system, like actually like writing server spec tests for that can be really painful. Whereas if you're building packages, you can actually say like, okay, like is this package installed? Like yeah, it's installed. Okay, like we're good to go. So I think there's sort of like a lot of benefits for people to actually go and build packages for their software, and to really like focus on that as like a key thing for keeping their infrastructure like sane and manageable, right? Like I think it's one of those things where I feel like when people were first talking about like configuration management, and even now still, like I still see comments from a lot of people online where people are like, oh, like why would I use Chef, or why would I use Puppet, or why would I use like any of these things when I can just write like a shell script to just like install all of the to just write out all the and config files that like I need on my servers, right? And the answer is like, yeah, okay, sure, like you could write a bash script to like manage 100 servers or whatever, but it's extremely brittle, right? There's like it's it's just like a huge pain if you're actually trying to manage like any sizable infrastructure, to manage that all from just like a bash script that constantly needs to be updated, constantly needs to be like reevaluated. It's like difficult to test, right? It's just like a huge pain. And so like people got over that mental block where it's like, okay, well if I actually sit down and invest the time to learn how to use Chef and Puppet, then like the payoff in the long run is going to make it easier for me to deploy new infrastructure, to debug any issues that come up with my existing infrastructure, to move hosting providers and not worry about is this script still going to work when I get to the new place, right? Like there's a lot of trade-offs that like make a lot of sense, like for investing the time and energy into like learning and understanding config management. And I think like the same is exactly true of packaging, right? Like packaging, like sure, it's not easy to like sit down and learn how to make an RPM package or a deb package or whatever, but like there's actually like a very real long-term payoff, and that exactly what's being installed in your systems. And like that's actually pretty important, right? Like if you're running some service and like the service causes a seg fault in some library that you're using, right? Like knowing that it's the exact same like byte for byte library on every single machine will help you to debug that and to deploy a new version without worrying that that like maybe you're running a different version on a different machine, or like it compiled differently because you have different versions of GCC, or like whatever the case may be, right? So I think there's like a lot of benefits, and I think that like the trade-off is actually worth it in the long run. But like it's hard for human beings in general to make that leap, right? To look at something that is going to cost them like a couple days of like sitting, learning, and reading, versus just like getting it done now, even if it's done like in a worse way, right? So hopefully, we'll be able to convince people that like packaging is like sort of a fundamental like important thing when it comes to managing infrastructure.
Yeah, it's kind of like back in the day, everyone had CGI bin Perl scripts because no one wanted to learn a framework, and now people realize that like it's worth the time to invest in a framework. Same thing with front end too. You see that with Angular and Ember and all that. It used to just be you whipped up jQuery on document ready, but then people realize that that's like it leads to a huge spaghetti code mess. So it actually pays off to invest to learn like framework, like to make things better in the long term.
Yeah, definitely. And there's kind of a couple things I wanted to hit on with you. Um, we can go either way because I think both will take a little time. One is like there's been an explosion of sort of package management tools, right? Like each language seems to have one. I guess CPAN, pip,
Yeah.
Ruby gems, npm, and there's even newer ones like I think like Bower is like a smaller like
Yeah. Yeah.
JavaScript one that
Front
you like npm install Bower and then use Bower. There's that tweet that floats around that's like, what is easy install?
Yeah.
What's a package manager? Well, how do you know? It's like pip use easy install and install pip. So it's like each language seems to have one, right? CPAN has been around forever. And now you've got all these distros, right? You've got the Debs and the RPMs, and Arch has its own thing, and Gentoo has its own thing. And so in this world of all these package managers and package formats, what have you focused on supporting, and do you also support like caching? Because I know you guys not just do like fully hosted, but you have some like inside of VPC kind of stuff that you support as well, right?
Yeah. So, so the first part, like about like what do we focus on and why and all that, like, I mean, we focused initially on Debian packages, RPMs, and Ruby gems, just because like those were the three that James and I had really needed support for, like at our previous jobs, right? So, previously, like James had been managing infrastructure at a company called BitLove, and like they had a lot of, they deployed on CentOS, and so they needed like a bunch of RPMs, and they had a bunch of Ruby gems. And I had previously worked at companies that had a bunch of Ruby gems as well, and I had to build like a local Ruby gem server myself, and I had worked at companies where like I was building software that was outputting Debs and RPMs that we were then going and selling to customers that they were installing on their machines, and so it was just like we focused on those three because those three are like really really common. Specifically, RPMs and Debs are like actually like just a really huge pain to do, like to create repositories that actually work and are secure. And so we're like, okay, if we can solve like these two or like these three, then we can look from there as to like where to go next or whatever. So it was mostly just looking at like the three that we use the most, that were also like really really painful. And so we built that, and that was sort of like how we built like the first iteration of the product or whatever. So as far as what you were asking about, like, a VPC or like a private version or whatever, yeah, we have and we're calling packagecloud Enterprise, which is like a version of packagecloud you can install inside your firewall that you can upload as many packages as you want. You can use it for whatever. We're talking to customers who are thinking about using it for selling software. So they have like a build system. It outputs a bunch of RPMs and Debs of software that they're selling. Those things all go into a package server, and then like their customers go and download it from them. So that's like one pretty big use case for like packagecloud Enterprise. Another good use case is just like if you're managing a bunch of internal infrastructure, and for compliance reasons you can't upload your packages to the internet. You can use packagecloud Enterprise to deal with that. As far as like caching and stuff, like we're working on like a lot of like really interesting higher level features that we think will be pretty cool. We've thought a lot about like how to implement stuff like caching or proxying, right? So like for example, if you apt-get install, I don't know, like Nginx or something as part of a chef recipe, making sure that like that package is cached somewhere so that next time you go to bring up another machine that needs Nginx, it can still run the same version, right? Because a common problem that like a lot of people might not be familiar with is the distributions like Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, like they will occasionally yank packages from their public repositories. So if you have chef recipes or puppet manifests or whatever that are pinned to use a particular version of a particular package, it's possible that those things can actually get ripped out or yanked out and can go away. And then when you're like really dealing with like some crazy load, or like there's like a whole bunch of more visitors to your site, and you're like, okay, I really need to spin up more new infrastructure. You try to do it, and suddenly like none of your automation, none of your tooling works because it's all depending on specific versions of things that are now gone, right? So we've been looking a lot about like how to build like some sort of transparent caching layer around all that. So that's sort of like a really interesting problem that we're working on right now. So I don't know. not sure like when something like that will ship, but something that we talked a lot about, something that we're like looking at with a lot of excitement. So.
Okay.
Why
Yeah,
would
that makes a lot
someone?
of sense. I've
I was gonna say, why would someone choose to use packagecloud Enterprise and not use another one of the repository software like Pulp or something else that's available out there?
Yeah. So the main reason is just because like a lot of the existing stuff that's out there is just really, really bad and just like doesn't actually work. Like this sort of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the show, which is just that like a lot of tools like give the illusion that they work, but they don't. They don't actually work, right? Like a lot like so on our blog, like on the packagecloud blog, like I wrote sort of 2 like really long blog posts about how to properly do GPG signatures for Debian repositories and RPM repositories, and there's like a lot of things that are involved there, and a lot of people don't realize like just like the amount of work you actually need to do. But the reason why like packagecloud Enterprise, in my opinion, is really dope is because you know it integrates really easily with S3. So if you have an S3 account, like you know all your packages that you upload can just go into your S3 bucket. You don't have to worry about backups. You don't have to worry about like really disaster recovery. Like we have a whole bunch of stuff built in for taking snapshots of the metadata and for just sort of handling like just the case where like your server explodes or whatever and you need to move packagecloud Enterprise around. Like we sort of built the thing from the ground up like with like DevOps in mind because we use it ourselves for like all of our internal infrastructure. And it's just like I don't know, I legitimately think that we've had a lot of customers who've come in who have used packagecloud from using other systems and have been like, hey, like packagecloud is like really really easy and straightforward to use. Like it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't know. Like I think there's just like a bunch of reasons like around like just the API, the ease of use, just like
Yeah,
integration with S3 stuff like that.
yeah. Speaking on integrations too, we integrate with Travis and Jenkins, so you can really have the whole pipeline where you push your gem up to GitHub or whatever. That triggers a Travis CI run, and then if the test pass, it'll get uploaded straight to packagecloud and available for your infrastructure to use. So you'd have to rig a lot of that automation up yourself with Freight or Pulp or whatever to get that going.
Coming from managing repositories and some Pulp infrastructure, I haven't had a problem with it, and that's why was a little confused because, especially for like you were saying, when packages disappear from upstream repositories, being able to mirror those in mass easily, just to instead of doing just a repo sync, actually having something that is a little more has an API in front of it to schedule syncs and even tie into other tools like Catello or the Foreman, and is also, I mean, I'm sure you guys are working on more package types, but also pluggable where I can, add pip repositories or whatever other, repositories I want. It's a plugin in that sense, and it's also open source, so I can extend it rather than relying on a third-party company to need to extend it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it really boils down. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just gonna say it just depends on like what your like business goals are, right? Like if it makes sense for your business to use Pulp or write a bunch of scripts around like create repo or repro, then by all means, like perhaps those are better solutions for what you're doing. I don't know, I think it just depends on like a case by case basis, like on exactly like what you need and how much time you have and sort of like what the development costs will be for you. Like a lot of the customers that we're working with for like packagecloud Enterprise, like they're huge companies with like pretty big engineering teams, and for them, at least in their calculation, it's like, hey, like why would we spend the time fighting with some open source thing that like may or may not work, that like we'll have to possibly extend or modify ourselves, and we can just like buy a thing that already works, and that works pretty well and has like a lot of features that we want. So I don't know, like I'm not saying that like packagecloud Enterprise is the solution for everyone, but for a lot of people, it can really fill like a pretty needed gap. So
Yeah, it's a classic buy versus build, trade-off. You have to analyze the cost yourself and see whether that's worth it for you.
Going also back to the caching thing you were talking about, it does seem that packagecloud fits a really a good specific goal of if you are developing a lot of your own software and needing to push your own software out versus mirroring large quantities, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, mirroring is something that we're looking at in the future, but right now, like the right now you upload the packages that you need to Package Cloud. So if you needed to mirror like whatever all of Apple 5, let's say, Package Cloud wouldn't be the right choice for you because there's not really an easy way to just like suck in an entire external repository.
Okay, so I mean specifically, Package Cloud's a lot of it's a smaller base of your own developed stuff rather than publicly available.
Yeah, I mean, we have people who take publicly available packages and upload them to their own repositories. So, sorry, there's just like some echo. I'm just like getting confused right now about what I was saying. But yeah, we have both use cases. Like we have people who are uploading their packages that they're of software they're selling to customers, and then we also have people who are like have specific versions of like MySQL or Ruby or whatever, who are uploading those to their own repositories, right? So like a lot of people, at least when it comes to Ruby, right? Like a lot of the distributions come with versions of Ruby that are, pretty old or like compiled with undesirable configure flags, or like just like options that you don't want actually enabled for whatever reason. And so like we actually have like a bunch of customers that are uploading, versions of Ruby that they've built internally that they want to install, that they want to use. So I don't know. Like I think it just really depends on like your use case and like what you want. Like as far as like mirroring like a huge repo, like we don't really have support for that right now. It's like something that we definitely want to add support for. So like if your use case is like, hey, I need an entire copy of like Apple 7 or whatever, then like Package Cloud probably isn't like the right tool for you right now.
Yeah, I've had experience with mRepo and Repo and Apply and even like Red Hat Satellite, a lot of these different things. It certainly it can be there's a lot of moving parts to a lot of stuff. So like things like Travis and GitHub, having them be turnkey is handy. So we kind of talked about what kind of packages you're supporting. And Julio, you mentioned a little bit with the integrations, but you guys are focused on like hosting and distribution of packages, right? So someone would still need some other infrastructure to build their deb or build their RPM, right?
Right.
What kind of like workflow are you seeing, people using? Like what are some of the popular tools you see people are integrating with and using you to publish to?
Sure. So one tool that a lot of people are using is something called Omnibus. I don't know if you're familiar with the Omnibus project at all, but for anyone who's not, Omnibus is basically just a thing you can use to generate sort of like a all-inclusive Debian or RPM file that will include sort of like all of the dependencies for running a particular application or application stack even on a user's machine. Right, so like say you were distributing like a Rails application and you needed, MySQL, Ruby, Unicorn, I don't know, like a whole bunch, a whole stack, Nginx, like a whole stack of stuff. You could use Omnibus to sort of package all those things together and install like the entire application stack, directly on your file system and do it in such a way that it's like easy to remove when it comes time to delete it or easy to update or whatever. So we actually have like a bunch of people who are uploading Omnibus packages right now, which is kind of interesting. I had never really seen or messed around with Omnibus until I started building Package Cloud. It just wasn't really something that I had like a use case for before. We also have a lot of people who use a tool called FPM to generate packages. FPM is cool. There's like a couple things with FPM that I personally have trouble like wrapping my head around, I guess. But FPM is like a really, really useful tool as well for people who just need like a really simple, easy way to generate an RPM or a deb. I personally like to just use like the older school tools when it comes to it, and there's a reason why. But I typically like to use like RPM build or so like you can use RPM build directly, or if you need like a clean room build environment, you can use a tool called Mock. Mock basically will just generate CH roots of different versions of CentOS or Fedora or whatever, and then do a package build inside of those CH roots. And the reason for that is basically to ensure that on a base system that you're generating a package that has all the dependencies properly set and everything like that. And so, we have a couple people who are using like things like Mock or pbuilder. Pbuilder is sort of like the equivalent of Mock. It does like a CH root clean room build, but on Debian-based systems. So we have a few people who are using those tools. I personally have used those tools in the past. The main reason why like using tools like that is a good call in a lot of cases is because those tools will generally output what is called a source package, which is sort of like the source code that was used to generate the binary objects. And the reason why like generating source packages is important is because like inevitably something on one of your machines is gonna break. Like something you're deploying is gonna break for some reason. And being able to say like, oh, okay, like this version of this library, like so for example, like we hit like a really interesting bug in libarchive at some point, and being able to just to sit down on my development VM and say like apt-get source libarchive and actually get the entire source for like libarchive that we're installing on our servers, with all the patches applied that went into the binary builds, so that I can actually look at and read the source and debug like a segfault is like incredibly helpful from like a debugging workflow perspective. So that's why like I personally tend to use tools that will generate source packages. I don't like the last time I looked at FPM, it didn't. It's possible that it does now. I haven't really kept up to date on the FPM project, but we have a lot of people who are using FPM. Like probably the majority of people who are making packages and uploading them to packagecloud are using FPM. So like if you're just getting started and you need to use like a really straightforward tool for generating packages, I would definitely recommend you check out FPM and see how it works for you.
Yeah, definitely. Jordan Sissel, who's the main author of FPM. He's a longtime Hangops attender. I think in some ways FPM is kind of like I don't want a package, but it's like path of least resistance to a package. It may not be the ideal Debian or Deb or RPM, but it's kind of like I just want a package. Kind of don't care as much. And
yeah,
that's been a lot of it is sort of that. It's like the quick and dirty. And then if you want to go deeper, like you graduate to something like Mock, those things.
Yeah, no, I think FPM makes perfect sense for a lot of people. Like I think it's certainly significantly better than running, configure, make, install, and like a chef recipe, and just like hoping that it works. So I don't know.
So one of the discussions I've seen for a long time, being on the ops side of things in my career, is people advocating for using a package for deploying your code, like whether it's like a jar or PHP application or a Rails application or Python or whatever, and that might be like packaging up an entire Python virtual env or like a whole like bundle install, and then moving that through like your deployment pipeline as a package. I'm curious if you're seeing anyone do that, and if maybe you're doing any of that kind of stuff with your own infrastructure in terms of.
So we're not seeing. I'm trying to think if we have anyone that. Well, I think we have maybe one customer who's building like a massive deb of like their entire infrastructure. It's sort of like I think there's actually like been a couple incantations of this idea, right? Like I've seen people generate like entire AMIs, like the disposable AMI thing. Like I think that was like a thing that like a lot of the Netflix people had been talking about, right? It's like building AMIs like every time you modify your infrastructure. We have one customer who's generating like sort of like these massive debs every time like something in their infrastructure changes, but for the most part, people are uploading like individual packages of either custom software that they've packaged themselves, like the latest version of Ruby or whatever, or software that they're selling. Like we don't really have many people who are uploading like packages of their entire infrastructure. As far as what we do like internally for our infrastructure, we use actually like a lot of modified versions of existing stuff. So like for example, like we had to fix a bug in zlib that was reproducing on our machines. Like we get a lot of uploads, and so we use zlib to process and generate a bunch of metadata on our backend. And we were hitting some bug in zlib, and there is no fixed version of zlib available for the version of Ubuntu that we run in production. So we ended up just like making a bunch of a custom package for that. We made a custom package for Ruby. We have a lot of custom packages in our infrastructure, and we use all those. We use Chef also to like just handle configuration management on our machines, and we have Chef just pointed at our private package cloud repository that has a bunch of packages for like components of our infrastructure. We don't like right now we don't have like a massive thing that just bundles like that encapsulates the entire production environment as like a single package. We just have the different components like Nginx or zlib or libarchive or anything that we've had to patch and modify ourselves. Like we've built a package for, and so like the advantage of doing it that way, by the way, like the reason why it's like really dope to do that is because in development, so we use Vagrant. I know myself and Julio, like we both have Mac laptops, and we actually do like a lot of our testing and development by using Vagrant, and we can actually like our provisioners and stuff for Vagrant actually point at the same repository that we use for production, and so we're using like literally byte for byte the exact same version of Ruby, of like libarchive, of zlib, of like any of the things that we use in production that are like patched or fixed or adjusted or modified or whatever. We're using literally byte for byte the exact same thing on our development VMs, and so that means that like when we run our like end-to-end tests and stuff, like we know, hey, like this thing is exactly the same. This is the same exact library that we're like using in production. So if we hit a bug on it in development, then we know that that bug's going to be there in production. So no, that's worked really well for us. But no, we don't do like the full like AMI or like full machine image thing ourselves. So.
I worked at a place that did the full. Sorry, Brandon. I was saying I just worked at a place that did the full AMI thing, and I'm conflicted about it. So it is nice just booting up a machine and having it all just work, but then iterating on that workflow is a nightmare because you have to wait like 45 minutes to an hour for each thing to build because you just want to change like one line or whatever. So I don't know. I guess it depends how often that piece of code is changing in your infrastructure to make it either case worth it.
Actually, but also a little bit I was thinking more specifically of where like your code deployment artifact is a package as opposed to like you're shoving a jar or like a git checkout. Like you make a deb of like the output of like a Jenkins build for just your code. Like how are you guys handling that in terms of like? Because I think you use Rails in at least some of your stack, right?
Yeah. So I think in Rails, like I don't think there's much of a benefit to packaging your entire Rails app as a gem, maybe, or as a dev. For Java, definitely you want to. I mean, that's the only way you package yourself up as a jar. There's no like source checkout kind of. So I have heard of people putting their whole Rails app in like a Debian or an RPM. But we don't do that. And
yeah, we have a lot of our like internal stuff for like, so we have a bunch of different internal gems that we've written ourselves that deal with specific aspects of like what goes on the back end, like extracting package metadata or generating indices or whatever. And each of those gems has like its own set of tests that run to verify that those libraries are performing as intended. And so, like, to some extent, like, we use package management in the sense that, like, those things are gems. Gems are packages, right? We're hosting those gems on packagecloud. And so, like, portions of our application are, like, factored out into individual packages with their own tests because those pieces of code, like, don't change much. Like, they exist. We built them. We have specs for them. For, like, the main app that changes quite a bit, we actually just deploy that sort of, like, just using, like, Capistrano and, like, Git and stuff. But we're thinking about actually changing that in the future as we're iterating on like a really cool feature right now, which we think may adjust the way that we do some of our internal deployments as far as like the main Rails app goes. But I think that like breaking your app down into components is like pretty important, just like in general from like a software engineering perspective. And like we've done that, and like we have those portions in packages. We don't use Debian packages. We actually just use Ruby gems because it's just, for that stuff, it's Ruby, so.
The Rails app itself is still just a source checkout every deploy, so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, at when I was at Mozilla, some of the infrastructure, like the sync infrastructure in particular, they had built a pipeline where like code deploys of the Python services went out as RPMs. And they had a whole pipeline for that. And, you know, I've seen other people talk about it. Sometimes it's like it's the one true way because, you know, there's some advantages with like rollback and versioning and stuff, but
For sure, for sure.
it can also get complicated. So one of the things that I've always also kind of enjoyed, Joe, you know, and knowing you and following like blogging and Twittering and some of the, you know, stuff that you talk about is like, you know, it seems like you end up debugging some like esoteric, interesting things with Linux and packaging. And I'm just curious if you talk about that a little bit. Some of the stuff you've seen as you've built this infrastructure and you're dealing with all these packaging formats. And
Yeah. So first of all, so I think sort of like the biggest source of confusion for like most of our users and just for most people who deal with packaging in general is like GPG stuff. And like I don't know, I'm sure there's a bunch of people listening or tuning into this or who will watch this in the future or whatever who will say like, oh, like, you know, GPG signing stuff for packages is easy. Like all I need to do is just modify this config file and write a thing here, and then like all my stuff is fine. So like what a lot of people don't realize is that like on Ubuntu, specifically on Ubuntu, like Debian pack. So okay, so let me step back for a second. So when it comes to GPG signatures, there's two things you can sign. You can sign the actual package file itself. So you can actually sign your deb. You can actually sign your RPM. The signatures for those things get embedded in the package. You can also sign the metadata about the package repository, right? So you upload a new deb, and then a bunch of metadata is generated for it, like, you know, what version it is, what architecture it's for, all that. And then that metadata that apt or yum will read in, that metadata itself can be signed with a GPG key and verified. So there's two separate, you know, signature things going on here. And a lot of people get that confused. A lot of people don't realize that like the metadata can be signed as well, or like some people know you can sign metadata but don't realize you can sign packages. A lot of people think that you just sign the packages and don't realize there's metadata signed. So there's like a lot of different like GPG moving parts here. But the most interesting thing that I found actually was just that on Ubuntu, you can sign your Debian packages if you want, but the actual Debian package signature verification is disabled by default. So when you like apt get install something, apt will automatically do signature verification of the checksums of the repository metadata, but the actual package signatures are not verified. It's actually like hard-coded in a config file as being disabled. And so I've seen like a lot of people who will say like, oh, like make sure to sign your Debian packages, and it's like, well, I mean you can, but like, are you enabling signature verification on your machine? Probably not, because to enable signature verification on your machine, you need to actually generate an XML signature verification policy file. And I wrote a blog post about this on the packagecloud blog. Maybe I can link it to you, and you can like, you know, send it out or drop it in IRC or whatever. But there's actually like a significant amount of work you have to do to get your system to actually verify GPG signatures correctly. And so like that was like a really interesting sort of like yak that I shaved out just to try to understand exactly what was happening with GPG and to try to just document all that stuff. Because like a lot of people just don't realize that, you know, a lot of people just don't understand how deb signatures work, and they think like, oh, I need to run deb sign to like sign this Debian file. And it's like, yeah, like, you can sign it, but like if you're not actually actively modifying your infrastructure to verify it, then like the signature doesn't mean anything because you're never gonna actually check it anyway. So that was like a pretty fun bug. I've debugged lots of stuff, like stuff with like librpm. Like librpm we use for extracting RPM metadata. That library has some bugs in it. We've hit a lot of interesting bugs in. Actually, we blogged about a bug. So we use a Ruby gem that has bindings for libarchive. Libarchive is just like a C library that will allow you to access and extract different archives. So like you can extract, you know, gzips, tar files, you know, xz files. You can extract like a very large number of CPI. Like you can extract a huge number of archives using libarchive. And I don't know. We did an interesting blog post about how like there's a Ruby library you can use that uses libarchive that we use, and it turns out there's like a whole bunch of bugs like around garbage collection and stuff. I don't know, just like lots of interesting bugs like all over the stack. It just sort of depends on like what sad story you want to hear today about computers, pretty much.
I think my favorite one was the create repo bug we found in CentOS 7.
Yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah.
That our actual testing found bugs in the official Red Hat create repo scripts.
Yeah. So create repo will create repo is the RPM tool for generating it's the RPM based tool that you can use to generate Yum repositories. And part of that process involves generating a list of, so like when you upload a new RPM, you're like, okay, here's my new RPM I'm adding to this repo. What Create Repo will do is Create Repo will look at that RPM and figure out what the dependencies are and list that out so that way when someone uses Yum to install like your package, Yum will see the dependencies and make sure that all the things that are needed for that RPM to run will be installed, right? So as part of the test, so we have like a module in our backend that has its own tests for generating RPM metadata. So like you give it an RPM and it outputs a bunch of metadata about that RPM, and we have like a bunch of tests that run it. And as part of the testing process, what I was doing is I was grabbing RPMs from the official CentOS repositories, and I was extracting their metadata, and then I was comparing the metadata that I was extracting against the metadata that is in the official repositories, because I assumed that the official metadata would be accurate. It turns out that there's actually a bug in Yum utils, which is what Create Repo uses to generate the metadata. So that what ends up happening is if you use Create Repo, I forget what version string it is. We have a blog post about it that explains exactly which versions are affected, but there's a set of versions of Create Repo that if you use them, you will generate incorrect dependency metadata. And so like your packages will end up with just incorrect version strings because of the way there's like a bug with the way that the version strings are being parsed in Yum utils. And then that's kind of the thing like with like a lot of like open source tools. Like open source tools are dope, and like in a lot of cases like that's all you need and like you're good to go. But in some cases like these really critical tools like like Yum is pretty important, right? Like Create Repo is pretty important, right? Like these things like don't really have like extensive tests that you can run or that are available to make sure that what they're generating is accurate, right? Like we have a bunch of tests for our infrastructure that are thorough enough that like we're actually detecting errors and bugs in official repository metadata, right? Like it's actually kind of weird to think about that. Like hey, like the official CentOS metadata is wrong, right? Like it's like actually weird to think about it like that, but it's true. Like that there just isn't really good testing around a lot of these things, and so. I don't know. That was a pretty dope bug. I completely forgot about that one.
When you're making the, it's important to think about too. When you're making the buy versus build argument, a lot of people think that Create Repo, you can just run it, it'll be fine. But then like you hit a bug like this, who knows how many hours it'll take you to figure out what's going on and then track this down. Like we see these bugs all day because of virtue of the fact that we're like dealing with these packages and writing the stuff all day. So it's something to think about for when you want to just get something set up for your environment.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, there are some pretty interesting things out there that you can run into. And so we're kind of, we usually try to keep this to about noon, sort of hitting the top of the hour. So if folks want to know more about the service, or also like what you guys are up to, just in terms of social media or everywhere, where should they go to find you?
We're at IRC on Freenode at hashtag packagecloud. Is it packagecloud or packagecloud.io? I think it's
just packagecloud.
Just packagecloud, yeah. And then we're on Twitter at packagecloud.io. And feel free to hit us up too at support@packagecloud.io.
Yeah, also like our personal accounts too. Like I'm just Joe D'Amato on Twitter. So like if you have packaging related questions like about building RPMs, building debs, getting GPG configured properly, like even if you're using open source tools, if you have like a question, you can hit us up. It's possible we know the answer because we sort of read a lot of the source code around all of those tools. So if you just have anything packaging related, you can feel free to ping us either on our company account, which as Julio said is packagecloud.io on Twitter, or just us individually, or on IRC or whatever.
Also worth mentioning, we're going to be at Chefcom in a few weeks. So if you want to come by and say hi.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be at Public Camp in LA next week. I guess that's on the 19th. So if anyone who's watching is going to be there and wants to chat in real life about packaging and stuff, you can. I'll be giving a talk there, so you can just come find me. And then we're also going to be at Chefcom. That's actually coming up in a couple months though. But if you run into us at Chefcom, feel free to say hi or ask questions about computers or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to be at Chefcom as well, so looking forward to. Joe, you're speaking, right?
Yeah, I have a talk at Chefcom. Just going to be talking about packaging and chef, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of the different bugs we found in, even like the official chef recipes and stuff for like setting up repositories. Have a bunch of bugs around like GPG signatures and SSL and stuff like that. And so I'm going to be talking about a bunch of those bugs and like how you fix them and how you solve them. And like what the implications are and stuff like that. So
cool. Now I also do you update timetobleed.com much anymore?
No, I pretty much stopped blogging at timetobleed.com. I've just been too busy like actually trying to build packagecloud, so there isn't. I mean, all my old posts are still there, but I haven't really written any new posts. I mean, the packagecloud blog has a bunch of my new blog posts about like weird bugs and like packaging stuff that I've sort of uncovered. It's similar in tone. It's similar like in style and stuff to Time to Bleed, like just sort of like really going down and getting all the details and stuff like that. But no, I don't update my personal blog much anymore.
I just back when I was doing the System Administrator podcast with Matt from Standalone Sysadmin, I remember we mentioned about blog post of yours. This was probably 2009, 2010. I just remember that was like the first time I encountered you. It was one of those blog posts you did about some obscure like kernel.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So
cool.
Cool. Okay, awesome. Well, this has been interesting. This is, I think, one of those parts of a lot of infrastructure stacks that maybe isn't always as dug into or thought about as everyone can. So it's kind of interesting to sort of peel back that onion and talk about it for a little bit. So thank you guys for your time.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'll see you at Chefcom.
Yeah. All right. Good. Brandon.
All right.